A former tech mogul now lives on the streets, invisible to the society that once revered him. But why? What secret did he uncover that made him abandon everything? An unexpected decision that left the market in shock. And now, he is about to reveal the truth. The icy wind cut through the streets of downtown Chicago on that winter night. While hurried executives passed by, protected in their expensive coats, Robert Smith remained seated on the cold ground, watching the movement with attentive eyes that contradicted his unkempt appearance. His unshaven beard and simple clothes hid a man who, until 2 years ago, had been the president of one of the largest tech companies in the country. Few would recognize in that figure the businessman who had once graced the covers of business magazines. Robert had chosen this path after an epiphany that completely changed his worldview. On a seemingly ordinary morning, while signing yet another $1 million contract, he realized he had lost something essential in his pursuit of success: his humanity. The decisive moment came when his only daughter, Caroline, presented a social project at her school about inequality and social invisibility. Her words echoed in his mind. "Dad, sometimes I wonder if the people we pass on the street are really invisible, or if we choose not to see them." Those words triggered a profound transformation. Robert began to question every aspect of his luxurious life, every corporate decision that prioritized profits over people. In a move that shocked the financial market, he resigned from the company's presidency, transferred most of his assets to a charitable foundation, and decided to experience the reality of the streets. His wife, Beatrice, initially did not understand his decision. "Have you gone mad, Robert? You can't just throw everything away," she argued. But Robert stood firm in his decision, explaining that he needed to truly understand life beyond corporate walls. On that specific night, as he watched the city's movement, a group of young executives approached. They wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases, reminding him of his former life. One of them, taller and more arrogant, stopped in front of Robert. "Hey, old man, you're blocking the restaurant entrance," said the young man with a disdainful smile. "Why don't you find another place to do whatever it is you're doing?" Robert remained silent, carefully observing the expressions of the young executives. He recognized in them his own past, the same arrogance that had once characterized him. The group continued with their taunts, tossing a few coins at his feet. "Buy yourself a coffee to warm up," mocked another guy from the group, provoking laughter. "Or better yet, take a shower first." What they didn't realize was that, while they were mocking, they were being watched not only by Robert but also by Frank Turner, his former assistant and current president of the foundation Robert had created. Frank was leaving the same restaurant when he recognized his former mentor. Robert noticed Frank's presence, but made a discreet gesture for him not to interfere. He wanted to see how far this display of arrogance would go. The young executives continued with their taunts, unaware that the man they considered a beggar had once led one of the largest companies in the country. "You know, young men," Robert finally spoke, his voice surprisingly firm and polite. "A few years ago I was exactly in your position. Same suit, same briefcase, same arrogance." The young executives stopped, surprised by the eloquence and controlled tone of the man they had just considered a nuisance. Frank slowly approached, watching the scene with interest. "Robert Smith," one of the young men murmured, finally recognizing something familiar in that bearded face. "It can't be—" The group gradually paled as the realization sank in. The man they had just humiliated was the legendary Robert Smith, the businessman who had revolutionized the tech market before his mysterious disappearance from the spotlight. Frank finally approached, a discreet smile on his lips. "Good evening, Mr. Smith. What a coincidence to find you here." His elegant and formal presence contrasted with Robert's simple appearance, creating a surreal scene for the young executives. "Frank," Robert responded with a nod. "How is the foundation doing?" The young executives remained frozen, alternating glances between Robert and Frank, trying to process the situation. The most arrogant of the group began to stammer apologies, but Robert raised his hand, stopping him. "No need for apologies," said Robert, slowly standing up. "But perhaps this is an opportunity for reflection. You judged me by my appearance, just as I used to judge so many others in the past." Frank watched the scene with admiration. Even After 2 years, Robert had not lost his ability to turn difficult situations into learning moments. The young executives, now visibly embarrassed, didn't know how to react. "The foundation is thriving," Frank finally replied. "Your mentorship project for young entrepreneurs has been particularly successful. Ironically, we have a new class starting next week." Robert smiled, looking meaningfully at the group of young men. "Perhaps some of these gentlemen might be interested in participating. I always say that true leadership begins with humility and empathy." The cold wind continued to blow, but something had changed in that environment. The young executives, once so self-assured, now seemed smaller, more humble. The lesson they had received that night would certainly stay with them for a long time. Caroline, who had been watching everything from inside the restaurant, smiled proudly. Her father had found a unique way to make a difference, turning his own life into a powerful message about humanity and compassion. The night was just beginning, and that unexpected encounter would be the first of a series of events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Caroline watched through the restaurant window as her father spoke with the young executives. At 19, she had become a determined young woman, studying business administration at university with a goal different from most of her peers. She wanted to revolutionize the corporate world through social responsibility. "Miss Smith," called the maitre d', bringing her back to reality, "your father asked me to let you know that he will meet you at home later." She nodded, grabbing her bag and heading for the exit. As she walked, she thought about how her life had changed over the past 2 years. Her father's radical decision, which had initially left her confused and scared, now made more sense than ever. On the sidewalk, the young executives were still talking with Robert and Frank. Their faces, once marked by arrogance, now showed a mix of shame and fascination. Caroline approached, and her father greeted her with a warm smile. "This is my daughter, Caroline," Robert introduced. "It was she who, unknowingly, planted the seed of this transformation in my life." The executives greeted her respectfully, clearly surprised by this new revelation. One of them, who introduced himself as Lucas, seemed particularly impacted. "Your father, he's a legend in the market," said Lucas, still processing the situation. "We studied his success cases in college. When he disappeared, so many theories emerged." Caroline smiled. "Sometimes the simplest answers are the true ones. My father didn't disappear, he just chose a different path." Frank, who had been silently observing the scene, intervened. "Lucas, you and your colleagues seem to have potential. Why don't you come by the foundation tomorrow? We have a mentorship program that might interest you." Meanwhile, in the penthouse of the Chicago building, Beatrice Smith paced restlessly around the room. After 2 years, she still struggled to fully understand her husband's decision. Her phone rang, displaying Caroline's name on the screen. "Mom," her daughter's voice sounded excited, "you won't believe what happened today." As Caroline narrated the night's events, Beatrice allowed herself to sit and reflect. Robert had always been a man of principles, but his radical transformation had shaken the foundations of her perfectly organized life. "Is your father still determined to live this way?" she asked, more to herself than to her daughter. "Mom," Caroline replied softly, "maybe it's time to look beyond appearances. Dad is doing something important." At the foundation, Frank was organizing documents for the next day. Robert's unexpected presence that night had been providential. The young executives, especially Lucas, had shown genuine interest in the mentorship program. Robert, meanwhile, walked through the city streets, feeling the cold night wind. His mind wandered between memories of the past and possibilities for the future. The encounter with the young executives had reminded him of himself at the beginning of his career, when success seemed to be measured only by numbers in a bank account. The next day, the Smith Foundation for Human Development was bustling from early morning. Lucas was the first of the young executives to arrive, surprising Frank with his punctuality. "I confess I spent the night researching the foundation," admitted Lucas as he waited in the reception area. "It's impressive how something so significant remains under the radar in the media." Frank smiled. "That's exactly the essence of the work we do here. Real impact doesn't need the spotlight." Gradually, The other young men from the previous night's group arrived. Each carried a different expression from the arrogance they had shown before. The encounter with Robert had touched them in a way they didn't fully understand yet. In a meeting room on the 20th floor, Beatrice surprised everyone with her presence. Elegantly dressed, she carried a folder with documents. "Frank," she called, her voice firm but soft. "We need to talk about the Foundation's future." Meanwhile, at a simple cafe in the city center, Robert had his breakfast watching the movement of people. His appearance remained deliberately simple, but his eyes shone with a wisdom that only the deepest experiences can provide. Caroline found her father at the cafe, sitting across from him with a conspiratorial smile. "The young executives showed up at the Foundation," she informed, "especially Lucas. He seems genuinely impacted by everything." Robert nodded, satisfied. "Sometimes we need a reality check to see beyond our own bubbles." "Dad," Caroline hesitated for a moment. "Mum went to the Foundation today. I think she's finally ready to understand." The former businessman let out a long sigh. His relationship with Beatrice had changed drastically over the past 2 years. Although they remained married, they lived separate lives, united only by their love for their daughter and a decades-long history together. At the Foundation, Beatrice surprised Frank with an unexpected proposal. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, showed an emotion long dormant. "I want to get more involved," she declared. "I spent 2 years resisting this change, but now I realize Robert was right. We need to make a difference." Lucas and the other young executives, now seated in a training room, listened attentively to the presentation about the mentorship program. Robert's words from the previous night echoed in their minds, provoking deep reflections about their own choices and values. The day was just beginning, and it was already shaping up to be a pivotal moment in the history of the Smith Foundation. Robert's choices, which once seemed like madness to many, were beginning to show their true purpose. The transformation he had initiated in himself was now spreading like ripples, touching and changing other lives. Lucas adjusted his tie for the 3rd time as he waited in the lobby of Smith Technology, his former company. After 2 intense weeks in the Foundation's mentorship program, he was there to make the most difficult decision of his career. His fingers nervously tapped on the leather briefcase he held, inside which was a carefully drafted resignation letter. "The President will see you now," announced the secretary, pointing to the meeting room door. Inside the mirrored office, Michael Braganza, the current CEO of the company, awaited him with an intrigued expression. Lucas had been one of his biggest bets, a young and ambitious man who had quickly climbed the corporate ladder. "So, Lucas," Michael began, "your message said we needed to talk urgently. Did something happen?" Lucas took a deep breath, remembering Robert Smith's words during one of the mentorship sessions. "True courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it." "Mr. Braganza," Lucas began, his voice firmer than he expected, "I've come to resign from the company." The CEO leaned forward, surprised. "Resignation? You just got a promotion. Are you going to the competition?" "No, sir. Actually, I plan to dedicate myself to a social project." At the Foundation, Caroline was coordinating a meeting with new volunteers when her phone vibrated with a message from Lucas. "I did it. I handed in my resignation." She smiled, proud of the transformation she was witnessing. Over the past few weeks, Lucas had become a constant presence at the Foundation, always arriving early and leaving late, absorbing every word of wisdom Robert shared. Beatrice, who was now actively participating in the Foundation's activities, watched the movement through the window of her new office. Her desk was covered with projects and proposals, very different from the financial reports she used to analyze. "Mrs. Smith," her assistant called, "Robert is here for the meeting." The encounter between husband and wife still carried a subtle tension, but something had changed. Beatrice's gaze no longer showed disapproval, but a growing curiosity about the work Robert was doing. "You were right," she admitted, breaking the initial silence. "It took me a while to understand, but now I see what you saw before all of us." Robert smiled, noticing how Beatrice's office had changed. Instead of expensive abstract paintings, There were now photographs of the Foundation's projects. In one of them, Caroline smiled alongside children at a school in the outskirts. "It was never about being right," Robert replied. "It was about doing what needed to be done." On the other side of the city, Frank was conducting an extraordinary meeting with the Foundation's board. Lucas was present, still wearing the suit from the company he had just left. "What I propose," Lucas explained, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "is a program of integration between executives and underprivileged communities, not just donations or one-off projects, but a real immersion like the one I experienced." The board members exchanged interested glances. Lucas's proposal was bold, but it carried the same transformative spirit Robert had initiated. "And how do you plan to fund this project?" questioned one of the board members. "With my inheritance," Lucas replied, surprising everyone. "My grandfather left me a considerable fund that I plan to use for investments. Now I know I can do something more meaningful with it." Caroline, who was watching the presentation, felt her heart race. Lucas had completely changed in just 2 weeks. The arrogant young man who had mocked her father was now there, willing to dedicate his personal fortune to a social project. On the street, Robert continued his routine of observing and interacting with people in vulnerable situations. His presence on the streets had become known among the local residents, who sought him out not only for material help, but mainly for advice and guidance. "Mr. Robert," called Mrs. Maria, a lady who sold coffee, on the corner, "that young man in the suit came back today. He left this envelope for you." Inside the envelope, Lucas had written an emotional letter. "You taught me in 2 weeks what 15 years of formal education couldn't. Now I understand that success is not measured by personal achievements, but by the impact we have on others." Thieves. At night in the Smith penthouse, the family gathered for dinner, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Beatrice had prepared the meal herself, abandoning the habit of hiring catering services. "Lucas resigned today," Caroline commented as she served the salad. "He's going to dedicate his inheritance to the Foundation's new project." Robert watched. His family gathered, realizing how his choices had triggered a series of transformations that went far beyond his own life. Beatrice, who had always been a relentless executive, now passionately discussed social projects. Caroline had found her purpose at the intersection of business and social impact. "Sometimes," Robert reflected, "we need to lose everything we thought was important to find what truly matters." Frank, who had been invited to dinner, raised his glass in a toast, "To the courage to start over." Caroline's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Lucas, his voice choked with emotion. "Caroline, you won't believe it. Michael Braganza just called me. He wants to learn about the Foundation's project. He said my decision made him rethink a lot of things." The transformation initiated by Robert continued to spread like ripples in a pond, touching lives in unexpected ways. The night was just beginning, and with it new possibilities opened up for everyone involved in this extraordinary journey of rediscovery and new beginnings. Michael Braganza parked his Porsche in front of the Foundation building, attracting curious glances from passers-by. The CEO of Smith Technology adjusted his Italian suit and took a deep breath before entering the building. It was strange to be there, in an environment so different from the mirrored skyscrapers he usually frequented. "Mr. Braganza," Frank greeted him in the lobby. "Welcome to the Smith Foundation." The businessman looked around. Unlike the ostentatious luxury he was used to, the Foundation had a discreet and welcoming elegance. On the walls, photographs of social projects replaced the traditional expensive art pieces. "Where's Robert?" Michael asked, his voice betraying a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Mr. Smith has his own methods," Frank replied with an enigmatic smile. "But first, I'd like to show you our work." On the upper floor, Caroline was conducting a meeting with young social entrepreneurs when she spotted Michael. She knew that man well. He had been the one who took her father's place at the company. "Miss Smith," Michael greeted her formally. "Your presentation seems interesting. May I join?" Caroline nodded, continuing her explanation about a technological training project in underprivileged communities. Her eyes shone with the same passion Michael used to see in Robert during the old board meetings. Lucas, who now occupied a small office at the foundation, watched the scene with interest. His former boss, once so distant and intimidating, seemed genuinely absorbed in the explanations about social projects. "You'd be surprised by the return on social investment," Lucas commented, approaching. "Not in money, of course, but in real transformation." Michael turned to his former employee, noticing a significant change in his posture. The ambitious young man he had known had given way to someone with a different spark in his eyes. "Tell me more about this return," Michael requested, his professional curiosity piqued. In a nearby square, Robert was talking to a group of children participating in one of the foundation's projects. Dressed in his simple clothes, he was teaching chess, using the game as a metaphor for life decisions. "Sometimes," he explained to a girl hesitating to move her piece, "the bravest move is the one that scares us the most." Beatrice, who was passing by on her way to a meeting, stopped to watch the scene. Her husband, once obsessed with quarterly results, now showed infinite patience while teaching strategy to children through a board game. Back at the foundation, Michael was attending a detailed presentation of the project's results. The numbers were impressive, but in a completely different way from the financial reports he used to analyze. 300 families directly impacted, Frank explained, showing graphs and testimonials. But the most important thing is the multiplier effect. Each transformed person becomes an agent of change in their community. "And how much does all this cost?" Michael asked, his business instinct still active. "Less than an executive's annual bonus," replied a familiar voice. Robert had quietly entered the meeting room, still wearing his simple clothes. Michael stood up instinctively, a mix of respect and embarrassment on his face. "Robert, you're different?" Robert completed with a serene smile. "Or perhaps more like who I should have been all along." Caroline watched the interaction between the two men with interest. There was tension in the air, but not the competitive kind that used to exist in the corporate environment. "Your daughter has shown me some impressive projects," Michael commented, trying to find common ground. "Caroline has a special gift," Robert replied with pride. "She sees bridges where others see walls." Lucas took the opportunity to present his new project, now more refined after weeks of development. His proposal for integrating executives and communities had evolved into a structured social immersion program. "What do you think, Michael?" Robert asked, deliberately using his successor's first name. Not as the CEO of Smith Technology, but as someone who has also wondered if there's more to life than quarterly reports. Michael remained silent for a few moments, his eyes scanning the room. He saw the enthusiasm on Lucas's face, the determination in Caroline, the serenity in Robert. Something inside him began to shift. "The company has resources," he finally said. "We could establish a partnership, not just financial, but transformative," Robert suggested. "Yes," Michael agreed, his voice softer, "transformative." Beatrice, who had returned to the foundation, watched the scene with a discreet smile. The pieces were starting to fall into place in a way she had never imagined possible. "Perhaps," she whispered to Caroline, "your father has found a way to change the system from within." The afternoon progressed, and in the Foundation's meeting room a new kind of negotiation was taking place. It wasn't about stocks or markets, but about how to use corporate power to generate real social impact. Michael Braganza left the Foundation, different from how he had entered. His Porsche was still there, but somehow it seemed less important. In the rearview mirror, he saw Robert waving goodbye, and for the first time, he understood that this man hadn't abandoned success. He had simply redefined its meaning. The auditorium at Smith Technology was packed that morning. Executives in formal attire mingled with community leaders and young social entrepreneurs, creating a visual contrast that perfectly symbolized the moment of transformation they were experiencing. On stage, Michael Braganza adjusted the microphone, preparing to make one of the most important announcements of his tenure. Beside him, Robert Smith, still in his simple but impeccably clean clothes, exuded a contagious tranquility. "Today," Michael began, his voice echoing through the room. "We're not just announcing a partnership. We're redefining Smith Technologies' role in society." In the front row, Caroline and Lucas exchanged knowing glances. The project they had developed over the past few weeks was about to take on a much larger dimension than they had imagined. "Our social integration program," Michael continued, "won't just be a corporate social responsibility initiative. It will be an integral part of our business strategy." Beatrice, seated next to Frank, watched with pride as her husband had managed to catalyze a change that went far beyond his personal transformation. The project, named Digital Bridges, planned to create technology centers in underprivileged communities, where Smith Technology professionals would work directly with local residents to develop technological solutions to real problems. "Every employee of the company," Michael explained, "will dedicate 1 day a month to work in these centers, not as consultants or teachers, but as learners of the local reality." In the audience, some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The idea of trading their climate-controlled offices for direct work in communities seemed challenging. Robert took the microphone, his serene voice contrasting with Michael's corporate tone. "True knowledge doesn't flow in just one direction. In the coming weeks, you'll learn as much as you teach." Lucas stood up to present the operational details of the project. His personal transformation had become a living example of the potential for change they sought to promote. "The first center will be inaugurated in Hope Gardens," he announced, projecting photos of the community. "And not by chance, it was there that I learned my most valuable lessons in recent weeks." Caroline took over the presentation, detailing how technology would be used to solve local challenges. "We're not bringing ready-made solutions. We're creating a space for co-creation where technical knowledge meets community wisdom." During the coffee break, the different groups began to mingle naturally. Executives talked with community leaders, discovering common ground that went beyond superficial differences. "It's amazing," commented a technology director to Robert, "how we had never thought of using our expertise in this way." Beatrice, who now coordinated the administrative side of the partnership, approached her husband with a smile. "You know what's most impressive? The genuine enthusiasm I'm seeing in people's eyes." At the end of the morning, Michael surprised everyone with an additional announcement. Starting today, 5% of Smith Technologies' net profit will be allocated to expanding this program, and not as a donation, but as an investment in the future. The sitao buzz that followed was interrupted by a question from the back of the auditorium. It was a young programmer from the company. "What if we dedicated not just 1 day a month, but a week?" Robert smiled, recognizing in that question the same spirit of transformation that had moved him 2 years earlier. Change was happening, not by imposition, but by inspiration. As they left the event, Carolyn found her father watching the city's movement through the building's window. "Dad," she called softly, "I think we've created something really special here." "No, daughter," Robert replied. "We just opened space for people to rediscover their own humanity." Lucas, who joined them, added, "And the most interesting thing is that this is just the beginning. We already have 3 other companies interested in replicating the model." Frank appeared with a folder of documents. "And not just tech companies. We've had contacts from industries, banks." "Is the corporate world ready for this change?" Beatrice asked as she approached. "The world is always ready for more humanity," Robert replied. "It just sometimes needs a small spark to ignite that flame." As the sun set over the city, the group watched the last participants leaving the event. Something had changed that day, not just at Smith Technology, but in how people saw the role of businesses in society. In Hope Gardens, the news of the technology center's inauguration was already spreading, generating a wave of hope and expectation. Mrs. Maria served coffee to a group of residents who were excitedly discussing the courses they wanted to take. Night fell, but for Robert, Caroline, Beatrice, Lucas, and everyone involved in this transformation, it felt like a new day was just beginning. A day where business and social impact were no longer separate concepts, but different faces of the same coin called human progress. The sun had barely risen when Robert arrived at Hope Gardens. The renovated building that would house the technology center shone with a fresh coat of paint, and a small crowd was already forming at the gate. Children, teenagers, and adults, all sharing the same look of expectation. "Mr. Robert," called Peter, Mrs. Maria's grandson, a 15-year-old boy who dreamed of becoming a programmer. "Do you really think I can learn to make apps?" Robert smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Peter, you're going to do much more than learn. You're going to teach, too." Gradually, Smith Technology employees began to arrive. Among them, Anna Louise, a senior developer, seemed a bit out of place in her formal blazer. It was her first time in this part of the city. "Welcome," Caroline greeted her at the entrance. "I see you're the first from your department to arrive." Anna adjusted her glasses nervously. "Actually, I came early because I wanted to better understand the context before starting." Inside the center, Lucas was coordinating the final preparations. The rooms were equipped with computers donated by Smith Technology, all refurbished by the community's youth, during the weeks of preparation. Every machine here, Lucas explained to a group of executives, was disassembled and reassembled by someone from the community. They've already started learning by doing. Beatrice, who had traded her traditional high heels for more comfortable shoes, supervised the organization of the community kitchen. Mrs. Maria had insisted on preparing breakfast for everyone. "You know," Mrs. Maria commented as she arranged the cups, "I never thought I'd see something like this here in Hope Gardens. My grandson hasn't stopped studying math since he heard about the project." The clock struck 8, and Robert gave a brief inauguration speech, not from the podium set up for the occasion, but among the people, as part of them. "This space," he said, "doesn't belong to the Foundation or Smith Technology. It's ours, all of us, and it will only work if we work together, as equals." The day's first activity surprised the executives. Instead of starting by teaching programming, they were divided into groups to learn about the community's daily challenges. Peter guided Anna Louise on a tour of the neighborhood. The developer discovered that the boy had already created an improvised spreadsheet system to help local merchants manage their inventory. "You did this by yourself?" she asked, impressed. "Necessity teaches," Peter replied shyly, "but imagine what we could do with real programming knowledge." In the main room, Caroline coordinated a group dynamic where residents and executives exchanged experiences. A young finance executive listened attentively as a woman explained how she managed the Residents Association without technological resources. "It's amazing," he commented to Lucas, "how they developed creative solutions with so little." Michael Braganza appeared mid-morning, this time without his Porsche, having arrived by public transport as Robert had suggested. "Different, isn't it?" Robert asked, watching his successor try to settle into a simple chair. "You know what's most different," Michael replied. "How I feel more useful here than in many board meetings." In the hardware lab, a group of teenagers was disassembling computers under the supervision of company technicians. Their insightful questions surprised the professionals. "They have a natural intuition for technology," one of the technicians commented to Beatrice. "They just needed the opportunity." Frank, who was meticulously documenting everything for the impact report, couldn't stop smiling. The interactions he observed were much richer than any metric could capture. "Look at this," he showed Caroline, pointing to a scene where Anna Louise and Peter were programming together, laughing at some technical joke only they understood. During the community lunch, social barriers continued to dissolve. Executives and residents shared not just food, but also dreams and ideas for the project's future. "We could create an app to map the neighborhood's skills," Peter suggested between bites. "That way everyone would know who can teach what." "Anna." Louise immediately grabbed her notebook. "Let's start prototyping this now." In the afternoon, the first official classes began, but something interesting was happening. Knowledge flowed in all directions. While Smith Technology professionals taught programming, residents taught about resilience, creativity, and teamwork. Robert watched everything with satisfaction, remembering his first night on the streets when he thought he was abandoning everything. In reality, he was just making space for something much greater. "Dad?" Caroline called, interrupting his thoughts. "You need to see this." She took him to a room where Peter was presenting his spreadsheet system to a group of impressed executives. The boy had turned his improvised solution into a tool that could help small businesses throughout the city. "I think we've found our first official project," Lucas smiled, also watching the presentation. As the sun began to set, no one wanted to leave. Anna Louise had cancelled 3 meetings to continue working with Peter on the app prototype. Other executives were already organizing study groups and projects for the coming weeks. "You know what's most impressive?" Beatrice commented to Robert as they watched the movement. "How everyone seems more alive, more present." "That's what happens when we break down the walls that separate us," he replied, observing how his family, the executives, and the community had transformed into a single force for change. The first day was ending, but it was just the beginning of a journey that promised to transform not just Hope Gardens, but how technology and humanity could work together for a better future. The monitor blinked tirelessly as Peter typed line after line of code. Beside him, Anna Louise watched with a mix of admiration and surprise. In just 3 weeks, the boy had absorbed programming concepts that normally took months to grasp. "This is amazing, Peter," Anna exclaimed, analyzing the app's interface that was starting to take shape. "You've thought of all the details that small merchants need." The app, which Peter had named TradeLive, was becoming much more than a simple inventory control system. It was a complete management platform for small businesses with features that reflected a deep understanding of local needs. Caroline entered the development room, carrying a stack of notes. Over the past few weeks, she had interviewed dozens of neighborhood merchants, collecting feedback on the prototype. "Mrs. Cleed from the grocery store tested the system yesterday," she reported, smiling. "She said she could do in 10 minutes. What used to take her 2 hours?" Peter blushed with pride. His knowledge of the local reality, combined with the technical skills he was acquiring, had created something truly transformative. In the next room, Robert was talking to a group of social investors who had become interested in the project. Among them was Sofia Mendez, one of the country's leading experts in social technology. "What's most impressive," Robert explained, "isn't just the app itself, but how it's reconnecting the community." Sofia agreed, watching through the glass as Peter explained a new feature to other neighborhood youth. "It's a perfect example of technology with a human purpose." Lucas, who now divided his time between coordinating the center and developing new projects, entered the meeting room excitedly. "You won't believe this," he announced. "TradeLive is already being used by 15 local businesses, and we have a waiting list of 30 more. Beatrice, who had taken over the project's financial management, was doing calculations on her tablet. "The impact on the local economy is measurable. Businesses using the system report an average 23% reduction in inventory losses." At Smith Technology, Michael Braganza was presenting the project's preliminary results to the board of directors. The metrics went far beyond traditional numbers. "We're not just developing software," he explained, projecting photos of the technology center. "We're creating a new model of social innovation." Anna Louise, who had become a sort of mentor to Peter, was especially proud. In a meeting with her development team, she shared how the experience had transformed her view of technology. "You know what Peter told me yesterday?" she commented, emotional. "Technology is only worth it when it helps people be more human." In the afternoon, the Technology Center received a special visit. Representatives from 3 other communities had come to learn about the project, interested in replicating the model. "The secret," Peter explained to the visitors with a maturity that surprised, "is to start with people's real problems, not with the technology." Frank meticulously documented everything, creating a replication manual for the project. "What's happening here," he explained to Sofia, "is a quiet revolution in how we develop technology." Caroline, watching the movement at the center, remembered her school project that had inspired her father's transformation. Now she saw how small actions could trigger profound changes. "You know what's most beautiful," she commented to Lucas, "how Peter is inspiring other youth. We already have 5 new projects being developed by neighborhood teenagers. Mrs. Maria, who continued to serve her special coffee at the center, smiled as she watched her grandson present the app to a group of businessmen. He's always been brilliant, she told Robert. He just needed an opportunity. At the end of the day, as the team prepared to close the center, Peter made a surprising announcement. I want to make Trade Live open source, he declared, so other communities can adapt it to their needs. Anna Louise hugged her young apprentice, proud. That's true innovation, she said. Technology that liberates, not imprisons. Robert, watching the scene, thought about how his decision to leave the corporate world had created a ripple effect of positive transformations. Trade Live was more than an app. It was a symbol of how technology could be an instrument of social change when placed in the right hands. The next step, Caroline announced, gathering the team, is to create a social project incubator here. At the center, Peter is already mentoring 3 other young programmers. As the sun set over Hope Gardens, the Technology Center continued to pulse with energy and ideas. Trade Live was just the beginning of a much larger transformation that was yet to come. The old warehouse next to the Technology Center buzzed with activity. After Trade Live's success, the social project incubator had become a reality in record time. On the freshly painted walls, colorful posters announced the new projects in development. Caroline moved between workstations where young programmers hunched over their laptops. At each table, a different idea came to life through code and algorithms. Maria Julia, how's the tutoring app coming along? She asked, stopping by a 16-year-old girl typing intently. Almost ready for the first tests, Maria Julia replied excitedly. Peter helped me solve that interface issue we were having. Peter had become a sort of junior consultant, sharing his experience with the new developers. His own success with Trade Live served as inspiration for everyone. Anna Louise, who now dedicated 3 days a week to the project, coordinated a group of volunteer mentors from Smith Technology. The company's corporate environment had changed dramatically since its employees began engaging with the incubator. It's amazing how they bring solutions we'd never think of in the corporate setting, she commented to Robert. These kids have a completely different view of technology. In the improvised meeting room, Lucas presented the incubator's first quarter, results to Michael Braganza and a group of interested businessmen. In just 3 months, he explained, projecting graphs on the wall. We have 12 projects in development, all focused on solving real community problems. Among the projects, Maria Julia's EduConnect stood out, a platform connecting struggling students with willing volunteers. There was also Health Map, developed by John, an app showing real-time availability of medicines at local pharmacies. Beatrice, who had discovered a true passion for social entrepreneurship, was working on structuring an investment fund specifically for incubator projects. The differential, she explained to a group of investors, is that the return isn't measured just in money, but in measurable social impact. Frank, always attentive to details, had developed his own methodology to evaluate the project's success, combining traditional metrics with human development indicators. Trade Live, for example, he presented, not only improved local business management, but strengthened community relationships. Merchants are collaborating more with each other. In the center's courtyard, Mrs. Maria had expanded her coffee shop into a small community restaurant managed through Peter's app. She served lunch to the young programmers and often became the first tester of new projects. Every program they create, she commented to Robert, is like planting a seed of hope in the neighborhood. Sophia Mendez, who had become a frequent visitor, was conducting a workshop on social technology for a group of young entrepreneurs. What you're doing here, she told them, is creating a new paradigm of technological development, one that puts people at the center of the process. In the development room, Peter was helping a group of younger kids learn the basics of coding. His patience and ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms had made him a natural teacher. The kids, some as young as 10, were already creating simple animations and games. See, it's like giving instructions to a robot, Peter explained, pointing to the lines of code on the screen. You have to be very clear. or it won't understand what you want." Caroline watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. Her father's vision was coming to life in ways she could never have imagined. The incubator was not just a place for innovation. It was a community hub where people of all ages and backgrounds could come together to learn, create, and grow. In the meeting room, Robert was discussing the next steps with Frank and Beatrice. The success of Trade Live had attracted attention from other cities and even other countries. Requests for partnerships and collaborations were pouring in. "We need to be careful," Frank cautioned. "We don't want to lose sight of our core mission in the rush to expand." Robert nodded. "You're right. Our focus should always be on the people we're trying to help. But we also have a responsibility to share what we've learned. If we can inspire others to create similar projects, the impact will be even greater." Beatrice, who had taken on a more active role in the Foundation's operations, added, "We should create a detailed guide, a blueprint, if you will, that others can follow. But we need to make it clear that each community has to adapt the model to their own needs and realities." Meanwhile, Lucas was in the courtyard, talking to a group of visiting executives. They had come to see the incubator in action and were clearly impressed by what they saw. "This is incredible," one of them said. "I've never seen anything like it. The energy, the creativity, it's palpable." Lucas smiled. "It's all about creating the right environment. When people feel supported and valued, they can achieve amazing things." As the day drew to a close, the team gathered in the courtyard for a small celebration. It was the anniversary of the incubator's opening, and they had much to celebrate. Trade Live was being used in dozens of communities, the incubator was thriving, and the Foundation's work was gaining recognition on a global scale. Robert stood up to address the group. "When I first decided to leave my old life behind, I had no idea where it would lead. But I knew I had to try. I had to see if there was another way, a better way, to live and work. And thanks to all of you, we've found that way." He paused, looking around at the faces of the people who had become like family to him. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much work to do, so many lives to touch. And I know that together, we can make a difference." The group erupted in applause, and as the sun set over Hope Gardens, the courtyard was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of people coming together to celebrate their shared vision of a better future. In the weeks and months that followed, the Foundation continued to grow and evolve. New projects were launched, partnerships were formed, and the impact of their work spread far and wide. But through it all, they never lost sight of their core mission: to use technology as a tool for social change, to empower communities, and to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And as Robert walked through the streets of Hope Gardens, greeting the people who had become his friends and neighbors, he knew that he had found what he was looking for all those years ago. Not success as the world defined it, but something far more valuable: a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and the knowledge that he was making a real difference in the world. The story of Robert Smith and the Hope Gardens Technology Center became a beacon of hope and inspiration for communities around the world. It showed that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, change is possible, when people come together with a shared vision and a commitment to making the world a better place. And so, the journey continued, one line of code, one project, one life at a time. The ripple effect of Robert's decision to leave his old life behind had grown into a wave of transformation, touching lives and communities in ways that would be felt for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't about the technology, the money or the fame. It was about the people, the connections, the relationships, and the shared belief that together they could create a brighter future for everyone. And as the sun rose over Hope Gardens, casting its golden light on the bustling technology center, the laughter of children, and the determined faces of the young programmers, it was clear that the best was yet to come. The story of Robert Smith and the Hope Gardens Technology Center was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And with each new day, each new project, and each new life touched, the legacy of that one man's decision to change his life continued to grow, inspiring others to do the same. In the end, it was a story of hope, of resilience, and of the power of community. And it was a story that would be told for generations to come, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes, bringing with it the promise of a new day and the chance to make a difference. And so, the journey continued, one step at a time, one life at a time, toward a future filled with hope, possibility, and the unwavering belief that together anything is possible.